Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We're just having a little look around the apiary, and today's the day we're going to be answering questions, beginner beekeeping questions. So there's no such thing as a silly question. Ask away, put it in the comments below, and we'll get to answering them. So the idea is we're here to answer your questions so that you can have a great start in this wonderful world of beekeeping. So I know you've got questions, put them in the comments below and let's get to answering them. If you have a look at these hives here, we've got not a whole lot of honey coming in, so it's quite interesting to just watch and learn. We've put lots of windows on the flow hive for you to understand what's going on inside your hive without having to pull it apart. So if you have a look here, you can see a few cells here with honey, but a lot of empty cells. So that's showing the bees are actually eating a bit of their honey and pulling it back towards the centre of the hive. They tend to eat the honey from the very ends of the frame first, and they do use one frame of honey and one frame of pollen approximately to raise a frame of babies in the bottom box here. The babies are called brood. In the bottom box you have wax and wood frames, just as it's always been. And the top box is our invention, flow frames, that my father and I spent a decade inventing, and now we have them all over the world with a big community keeping bees and harvesting honey in this new way. Any questions? Put it in the comments below. No such thing as a silly question.
Cedar, what's the difference between harvesting with a flow hive and the traditional method of honey harvesting?
So the answer is it's really quite different. So conventionally you need to get in your bee cert, get your smoker out, smoke the bees, take the lid off the hive, pull out all of the frames. You can see a frame here through the window. Brush off all the bees. Commercial apiarists tend to use a leaf blower to blow the bees out of the box. You then take those frames to a processing shed that you've set up, which if you're a small scale beekeeper will be your laundry or the shed. For me it was the shed that I used to also live in. And then you get a hot knife and cut the wax capping off each frame, put that into a centrifuge and spin the honey out. It spins around at high speed and the honey then flings out against the stainless steel walls, collects at the bottom, and then you need to filter it because there's a lot of wax and often bee bits that end up in your honey in that process. And then you've got to clean up all that mess and take those frames back to the hive again, trying not to mix up one hive to the next because you don't want to share those pathogens around. I used to do that. I used to do a lot of it and sell honey to the local shops, and I thought there must be a better way. So the concept was, can we just tap the honey straight out of the box? And after a decade-long journey, my dad and I managed to get that happening, and it's 5 years ago now that we launched the Flow Hive to the world, and it was received in an amazing way. Thank you so much for all of those that supported us. If you're tuning in now and you were one of our founding supporters in 2015, let us know. It's really interesting to us to also know whereabouts in the world you are. So basically the flow frames allow you to turn a handle, and we're not actually going to show you because there's not a whole lot of honey today, but you turn a handle here and the honey comes straight out into your jar. Doesn't need any further processing and it's ready for the table. So really quite different to the conventional way, and I'm really happy to say it works actually better than I thought it would in all the years of inventing.
David Morris is asking, what causes the different colour in the capping?
So that's a great question. If you have a look inside this window here, you can see that the capping is actually quite dark on this one. And the answer is new wax or old wax. So if the wax has been in there for a while, the bee footprints and things build up over time. If they're recycling wax from the brood box, then there could be a lot of dark pigments in it from the process of the bees going through their cocoon phase as well. So when they use old wax and recycle it in a hive, it will tend to be darker. When they're producing brand new wax, it will tend to be really white or yellow. They're just bringing that fresh resources in, the pollen and nectar, and excreting wax from their wax glands. Now, the other reason it could be dark is it could have started off light, but the bee footprints will colour it. Beekeepers that are collecting comb for comb honey will tend to put top entrances in because they don't want as much bee footprints around the hive on the honeycomb surface, and they want that really light honeycomb colour that tends to sell a bit better. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Having dark comb doesn't mean it's bad in any way. In the brood box, if you've got really dark old wax, then at some point beekeepers like to cycle that out, so you're reducing the pathogens or even pesticide load that the bees could have in that wax in the hive. There's lots to cover here, so keep asking questions and we'll keep answering them.
Justin asks, what's better, brood frames with foundation or frames without foundation?
Okay, so I don't have an example here to show you, but basically a typical brood frame is just a wooden surrounds, and then our frames are built to accommodate either wax and wire foundation. So you can go through that process of putting wires through, heating those wires up with jumper leads from a car battery, melting your wax sheet into it, or you could put a plastic foundation sheet in there, or you could just put your comb guide in the top and let the bees do it themselves. Now, I prefer the latter. I prefer the bees to do it themselves because they get to make those decisions on what size the cells are and size it perfectly for their babies, and there's believed to be a health benefit for that. Now, the disadvantage of going for naturally drawn comb where you let the bees build it themselves is they can go wonky sometimes. So there's a bit less work in putting that foundation in each frame, but a little bit more work in watching them as they build and making sure they're staying on line that first time as they're building their combs. Now, I find it more exciting to be in there with the bees, having a look, checking them out, seeing how they're going, than I do sitting there wiring and waxing all day. So I'm very happy not to do the waxing and wiring process anymore. It was tedious and long, but and so for that reason, and for the health benefits, I prefer to let the bees just do their perfectly natural thing in the bottom box here and build their comb from the comb guides that we supply.
Wes asks, for someone who literally knows nothing about beekeeping, is this the hive for them? What kind of maintenance is there? Okay,
so we have about 75,000 orders from 130 different countries, and a little over half of those orders are brand new to beekeeping. So what we've done is developed a whole lot of training material for you to get started, and I think it's less of a learning curve with the flow hive because you don't have to go through that process of learning how to harvest your honey as well. Harvesting honey really is quite simple. You turn the handle and the honey flows out of that frame into your jar. And we've also put observation windows on the hive and a pest management tray down here, and a few extra features on the base that let you level up your hive and so on. So for that, for those reasons also, I believe this is a great way to start in beekeeping, and so do many others around the world. So if you want more of a handhold, if you want to go from nothing to really getting that fascination of bees and learning all about them in an in-depth way, then we have put together a program called thebeekeeper.org, which has contributions from experts all around the world, and there's a month free there. If you want to tune in on that, check it out, see if you like it. Go to thebeekeeper.org and have a look, and that way you can get started, and we'll send you videos in a meaningful order for you to learn all about bees, all about beekeeping and what you need to do. As far as maintenance goes, that differs a little bit per country. So here we don't have the varroa mite here in Australia, so that makes it a bit easier. There's far less maintenance you have to do because we don't have that mite. Now, having said that, it is a routine requirement to go through your brood nest and check for pests and disease, and we've got plenty of videos showing you how to do that. And you'll want to get through the brood nest at least a couple of times a year, and when you see an issue occurring like low bee numbers coming in and out of your hive or in the windows, you want to get in there, check you've still got a laying queen, check the brood's looking healthy and happy. We've got plenty of videos showing you how to do that. If you are in some parts of the world, the varroa mite, during the honey season you may have to inspect far more often. There's even in Germany, beekeepers are suggesting you check weekly. So there's about the spread of the maintenance on your hive. Now, it's far less than things like chickens where you have to go and close them up each night. The bees are free to come and go. They put themselves to bed, and if you look after them, you get this amazing reward of honey.
Rob asks, what flowers, veggies and fruits are best to help our bees thrive?
Okay, so if you've got some land, you've got some acreage, then planting flowers is a great idea. If you've got a really small yard like this, then planting a garden around your hive is fun, but it's not going to produce enough honey to give you a honey crop out of it. You might help prop up your bees a little bit, but what you will do is really promote all of the little native pollinators that often only have a 200-metre radius, and we really do recommend you plant flowers in your garden for all of those species that are on the brink of extinction. We need to give them stepping stones, especially through the urban landscape. So planting flowers is a great idea for that. And planting, if you've got a bit more land, then you can start planting forage for your bees and make a difference that way as well. There's also medicinal species you can plant, the leptospermins. That's a great idea. You can plant them and actually get medicinal honey in your hive, which is amazing. You've probably heard of the manuka honey, similar to that. If you're just trying to attract pollinators, often the purple flowers really do attract the pollinators. You'll get here in Australia the blue banded bee, you'll get the teddy bear bees, you'll get all sorts of little species coming in to check out those flowers, and it's a wonderful thing to watch and learn, especially if you've got a family as well, to get out in the garden and see what's going on and really see the effect of what planting a garden does for all of those little species.
Tonya asks, what's the best hive for a small yard in the Buffalo, New York area? There's plenty of space around us, we just don't have a large yard.
Okay, so there is people keeping bees even on balconies and even on rooftops, so it's not necessarily a requirement that you have a large yard, but you do have to think about your neighbours. So we've got a video called Situating Your Hive, and that's just about making sure that they have a flight path that isn't bothering anyone. You don't want to point your flight path right where your neighbours walk, for instance. There also could be issues with pets and things. You might want to situate it so that your dog can't come and stick its nose in the front of the hive, although they'll probably learn quite quickly that that's not a good idea. And there's also access to children and things like that to think about. If you are concerned, then do look up our first aid. We have links on each page in terms of beekeeping, but it's certainly not a requirement that you have a big acreage to keep a hive. Now, there's also things like just making sure that the light on the front of your house or your neighbour's house can't be seen directly from the entrance of the hive, because you tend to get a few bees buzzing around at night time. So there's a few tips there on situating your hive, but look up that video if you want to know more. As far as what hive type, any of the hive types will suit for a backyard. Basically they're quite similar. We just have different sizing to match what's currently going on in the world. This is the most popular, which is what we call the Flow Hive 6, and that's because it's got 6 flow frames in here, and it matches an 8 frame Langstroth size. So it's got 8 brood frames in the bottom here and 6 flow frames in the top. Just come down the row, we've got one that has 7 flow frames in the top and 10 brood frames in the bottom. Tends to be popular in those cold areas where people want a slightly larger hive size, so that there's a bit more stores to survive the long winters ahead.
What's the difference between a Flow Hive 2 and a Flow Hive Classic?
Okay, so the Flow Hive 2 has a whole lot more features to make things just a little bit easier. If you have a look at this hive here, well, let's come over to this one here. You've got, starting from the bottom, you've got these adjustable feet which allow you to really find level, so it saves that process of getting out the mattock and chipping away at the ground trying to get yourself a level surface to put your hive on. You can simply adjust these feet here and find the level point. Now we've put bubbles here, level bubbles, to show you the level point. I'll just spin this around so you can see it a bit better, and you can see that we're not quite level, so that the sideways direction level is just to help you with the bees drawing natural comb. If you're a bit off level, then the bees will tend to build along with gravity and could possibly join to the neighbouring frame, and then you've got a bit of a mess. So to adjust it, you can just lift up the edge of your hive. Oh, this is not very stuck yet because we only put it on last week, and just spin this foot here, and now we have level. I better spin the front one. Okay, and then if we go to the side, you've got a level bubble here also. So these features don't exist on the Classic Hive, and that's to get the right honey harvesting angle, because the Flow Hive needs a 3-degree backward slope. We'll put this level here to help you get that without having to get out your app with a level on it. Then if you have a look here, we've got a pest management tray. Now we're catching a whole lot of beetles at the moment that you'll see in here. See these black beetles we're catching? That they are the small hive beetles. So the pest management tray helps you catch those hive beetles by putting a bit of oil in there, and also you can use the surface on the underside for counting varroa mites. If you want to spin that around, if you're doing what's called a sugar shake, or you're just trying to count the mite load, then the white surface helps you do that. Then you come to the ventilated cover. So there's a screen bottom board up under here that allows plenty of ventilation up into the hive. You can either take the tray right out and give maximum ventilation. You can put the cover this way up, which blocks it off a little bit, or you can spin it around this way and get ventilation through these vents up through the screen. So there's a couple of different adjustments there. We've also gone to brass knobs. We found on the Classics that after some time the wooden knobs might pull off, so we've gone to really sturdy brass fixtures that are bolted all the way through, and also these brass L latches as well. We've got a harvesting shelf that clicks on here that allows you then to use this cover to make a nice shelf, and that's adjustable to different heights using these screws here. If you come up to the super, this is called a super, which is a honey collection box. It's the name for a honey collection box. Then we have a extra window on the side just to help you. Now we've just put this box on last week. The bees are just starting to work it. We've placed a blob of wax in here, and you can see if you look really closely, they've actually started to redistribute that in that area, and they've completed some of the cells ready to start putting honey in. Not sure if you can see that in the video. Give us a thumbs up if you can see the way the bees have started to wax up some of those cells there. It's amazing they'll actually recycle wax around the hive. Coming up to the roof, we found that the classics in really strong wind situations, once it gets to about 80 kilometres an hour here, the roof tends to blow off on the classic because it comes up this slope here. So we put these wing screws that let you fasten the roof onto the hive. I've also included an inner cover with a plug in it, which gives you the choice for the bees not going up into the lid. So there's just a few extra features to make it a little bit easier for you. The classic hive's also a good model. It's been very popular around the world. The level is built into it in terms of there's a slope already on the baseboard, but you will have to put it on a level surface. It has a sliding piece of core flute to use for counting those mites if you're in a varroa area. Varroa mites are these tiny little red mites that get on the bees. We don't have them here in Australia, luckily, but most other continents do. So that's about it, really, in terms of the differences. If you can think of anything else, put it in the comments below.
Stephanie says, my 10-year-old son wants to start a beehive. Please help, don't even know how to get started.
Okay, so the people go about it in different ways. Some people like to go and do a bee course and touch and feel the process first, and other people like to just jump in, get their gear, get started and learn as they go. Now, I'm the kind of jump in person, but people have different personality types. So what a lot of our customers tend to do is they order the hive, they follow our videos on how to put it together and put their finish on it, or they might choose to paint it. There's a lovely example up here. And at the same time, it's a good idea to order bees from a bee breeder. That's the easiest way to get started, and a nucleus hive is the easiest way to get started out of the 4 different methods of getting bees. If you have a friend that keeps bees, you could take a split from their hive, or you could go looking for swarms to catch. Now, if the easiest way is to order a nucleus or a package. A nucleus is a going little beehive. It's got about half of the frames that you'll need in the bottom box already going, with honey stores, with pollen stores, with a laying queen, so the brood's in there, and all you need to do is get in your bee suit, follow our how-to videos of putting those bees into the hive. So you need your bee suit, gloves, smoker, hive, and ordering bees from a bee breeder. Order a nucleus and put them in and look after them, and your hive will grow. You put the super on top. If you get a good honey flow, they'll start to store honey in this top box, and then you get to enjoy that beautiful thing of harvesting honey. No such thing as a silly question. Keep them coming.
Some people are asking whether or not cold climate is going to be an issue for using their flow hive.
Okay, so that's a question that comes up a lot, and we have lots of beekeepers successfully using flow hives in cold climates. Nevertheless, there's this reputation that seems to have spread through, in particular Europe, that flow hive won't work in cold climates. In fact, my father was there touring around, and everyone would come up to him at the stand, at the flow hive stand, and say it won't work in cold climates, and wander off again. So he ended up putting up a sign saying it does work in cold climates, and then more useful conversations would start. So it's a bit of a myth that it doesn't work in cold climates. We have people in Canada, we have people in Norway, we have people in Tasmania, we have people in the northern parts of North America, we have people in Europe, and tend to be harvesting honey at the warmer times of year anyway. So that means honey can flow out of your hive at a more decent rate. If you're choosing to harvest when it's already quite cold, then it'll still come out, it'll just take a long time. We've done tests here in Australia at freezing temperatures, really early in the morning, edge frame, so it's going to be colder, and it just takes a few hours to come out instead of 10 minutes to half an hour. So, but having said that, you tend to be harvesting in the warmer months anyway, and it'll flow out as per normal, as you see on our videos.
Carly's asking, what do you reckon is the #1 mistake that new beekeepers make?
Okay, That is a great question, and it's probably being impatient. So like any kind of farming, like any kind of agriculture, there's an element of patience that you'll need. And sometimes, and you'll read these stories and you'll look at what other people are doing, and they've put their hive together, and a month later they're harvesting this beautiful honey and sharing it all around their neighbourhood. And then you're going, how come? What's wrong with my hive? And the reality is that sometimes it'll take a long time for your bees to really build up and fill the super with honey, and allow you to then be able to share some of that honey. And the factors for that are, you need a healthy colony, so the queen's laying lots of eggs, lots of bees in your hive when you open the window, and once you've got a lot of bees in your hive, they're built up to that point, then you need a strong honey flow, so the flowers are dripping with nectar and the bees can go get that, bring that back into your hive and store honey in your flow frames. So don't be alarmed if it takes some time. There are situations where you don't even get honey in a season because your bees are still just getting established, and the things don't align with a healthy, strong number of bees and a nectar flow. Great question.
Some people are asking, which direction should I orient my hive?
Okay, so if you have the choice, then facing your hive so it gets a little bit of morning sun, especially in winter, coming into the entrance, and a bit of shade during the midday or afternoon in summer, that would be the ideal kind of situation. Having said that, that's kind of more of a commercial beekeeper thinking, to get sun shining in the entrance in the morning, wake them up earlier and get an hour more production from your bees. It's not going to be as much of a concern for a home beekeeper. So if you're just keeping bees at home, there's going to be things that are higher up the priority order than making sure they wake up early, like pointing the hive to where people aren't going to walk, for instance. So I would first of all make sure it's situated so that the bees have a good flight path that isn't going to bother anybody, and then think about pointing it towards that morning sun and making sure they have shade in the afternoon. You can keep bees totally in the shade, you can keep them in the full sun like this. If I had the choice between full sun or full shade, I'd put them in the full sun, because there is pathogens such as chalk brood that seem to be more prevalent in those hives that are in a shady, damp environment. Okay, keep those questions coming.
Some people are wondering if it's normal for the bees to move honey around their flow super.
So these frames have just gone on last week. You can see there's not a whole lot of activity. We don't really have enough bees to fill this super yet. We had a look at the brood. They are going to be expanding soon. There was brood all the way out to the edges, so expect in the next few weeks for this to become nice and full with bees. It is normal for the bees to move honey around. In fact, they do it all the time. So it's quite a joy actually watching the bees move honey around in this window. And if you watch it morning and afternoon, you'll see quite a different pattern of honey in these cells once they get to that stage. And that tells you a bit about what's going on. Sometimes you'll find little drops of nectar splattered around all of the cell walls, and that's them trying to get enough surface area to really dry out that nectar and start that dewatering process. Another reason why they might move honey around is perhaps you've harvested a frame here, and they've decided they actually would like honey to be closer to the centre of the hive, and they start pulling it in from one of these frames and putting it into here. Now they don't tend to do that if your frame is capped. If the honey's already capped and they've gone to the trouble of getting the water down low and putting their capping on for it to keep, they'll tend to wait until they're hungry to decap that and move it. But if the frame here isn't capped yet, they'll move it quite quickly to balance out the honey and keep honey towards the centre of the hive. If you're wondering what capped looks like, if you have a look in this window here, you can see what a flow frame looks like when it's capped. You can see how they've put a wax kind of sheet over their hexagon cells there. They've decided that the honey moisture content is below 20%, and they want to keep that for when they might get hungry, and they've put their wax capping over the top to preserve it. It's a bit like putting a preserving lid on your jam jar and storing it for later. If you come around to this side of the hive, you can see that the frame isn't capped, so you can get an idea of what it looks like. In fact, there's partial capping here. Looks like they've gotten a bit hungry and have started to eat some of these cappings away and eat the honey. And here you've got capped section, so there's capped and then non-capped.
Elizabeth is asking, is it easier to tell the health of your hive and if it's in trouble?
So after a while it is. So basically there's quite a few signs to look out for. One of the most common is the queen has stopped laying, or they've lost their queen for some reason, and you'll see the bee numbers really dropping in that case. If you've gotten in there and had a look, you might be able to pick that up earlier, but basically a later sign of the queenlessness is the number of bees in the hive really starting to drop. You can also get an idea from your pest management tray what's going on. If you see a whole lot of beetle larvae dropping, you might realise that the beetles are taking over. You might see a whole lot of those little black beetles running around in the tray if you live in an area that has the small hive beetle. So there's a certain amount you can tell from the tray and what's falling into that area. But the bee numbers and what's coming in and out the front is one way to really tell if your hive's doing well. Having said all of that, you may not know if you've got one of the bee diseases, EFB or AFB, and to do that you'll actually need to inspect your frames, and that's why there's mandatory routine inspections to get in there and have a look and check for those diseases in your hive. So that's a little bit harder, but we have plenty of videos showing you how to do that. You get into your hive and you lift up the frames. It's actually fascinating and a real joy to be able to look in on what the bees are doing and really learn about what they're doing. So I consider that one of the many joys of beekeeping, is getting in there and checking out what's going on in your brood box. And that's one of the health checks you'll need to do.
Look over here, Cedar. We've got the honeybee and some native Australian pollinators sharing forage.
That's great, isn't it? You'll often see, here we have these are little, what I call the TC bees, or Tetragonia carbonara. Sounds a bit like a nice meal down at your Italian restaurant, but it's actually a type of native Australian bee, and it's called the sugar bee. In fact, we have the oldest living culture of honey harvesters in the world here in Australia, who still harvest honey the traditional ways they've done for hundreds of perhaps 100,000 years. And they basically they'll find one of these little bees and they'll tie a hair to it, or a little feather, and then they'll watch it as it goes back towards their nest. And once they've found it, could be in a tree, or could be in some kind of old log, and they will then break it apart and harvest the honey from those little bees. It's really kind of hot, spicy honey. They tend to mix the nectar and the pollen together, so it's quite a different thing, and highly medicinal, no doubt. It's a beautiful thing to plant forage and really see what comes.
We've got some people asking whether or not the flow hive is suitable for native Australian bees.
So the answer is no. The native Australian bees, the ones that you can harvest honey from them, are these ones, because they are colony forming hives that store honey. However, they don't store a whole lot. You're looking at half a kilo to a kilogram of honey per year, so you wouldn't go to the trouble of inventing a system to harvest that kind of honey. There's really not a whole lot you can get out of a hive of native Australian bees. We got time for a couple more questions?
We've got some people tuning in and asking whether or not it's okay to split your hive in winter.
Okay, and the answer is it depends, like many things in beekeeping. So here, you could do that if there was a lot of forage around. Now, the melaleucas here, the paperbark, they pulse with the rains, they come and go. Right now I was expecting a flow to come. If you've got the bees collecting a lot of nectar, you can see it building up in the windows, then that could be a good time to split if you're in a subtropical or tropical region, because the bees have enough forage to really get going in that new hive. For most people, if you live in a place that has a longer winter than we do, we get beautiful days like this all winter, but if you have that long cold winter and you have those snowy times, then you wouldn't be splitting in autumn. If you're in the northern hemisphere, then it's the springtime there now. It's a perfect time to split once your bees are built up. Depending on your strategy, some people like to split quite early and keep making new hives during the season. Other people like to let it build up to this point where they've filled both boxes and the bees are starting to bulge at the front before they take a split. So if you're interested in taking a split, we've got videos showing you how to do that, and we've also got more in-depth videos on thebeekeeper.org where you can learn all about things like taking splits from your hive. One last question.
Nathan asks, do you offer any payment plan on the flow hive? Cheers.
We do actually. There's a few options there at the checkout where you can take advantage of payment plans if you wish. Thank you very much for all of your questions. Tune in again next week. If you'd like to know something specific, put it in the comments below. We'll keep answering questions, and also let us know what you'd like us to cover next week and we'll add it to the list. We'll be here each week to answer all your questions, and hopefully that makes it a nice, easy way for you to get into beekeeping and really enjoy bees. If we look after them, they'll look after our world. Pollination is essential to our whole food system, and if you look after them, you also get that beautiful reward of honey. Thank you very much for watching.